It's happening! It's happening! Another Star Wars! And not one of those Looney Tune ones either. Episode 7! It wasn't supposed to happen. George Lucas said he'd never make the last trilogy. He was done. Star Wars was done. The last thing we'd ever know of Star Wars on film was gonna be this. But then, a lone figure appeared. A lone figure with large ears who commanded attention, who knows the ways of the Force, and of corporate buyouts and intellectual property rights, whose Jedi mind tricks convinced Lucas to sell his baby. Disney. In 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm and the rights to Star Wars for 4 billion Republic credits. The frozen Star Wars film franchise was de-thawed from its carbonite limbo, and it began. Plans of new movies, rumors of storylines, casting announcements, directors, release dates. Whoa, this is all happening too fast. Yeah, sure, Disney loves money, let's not fool ourselves, we know where this is coming from, but who cares? Episode 7, The Force Awakens, J.J. Abrams, and is that... And these guys? They're all back! TIE fighters, X-Wings, lightsabers! I mean, who else waited online and broke Fandango pre-ordering their tickets? How many times did you watch that trailer? And it's not just The Force Awakens. More Star Wars movies are coming. Rogue One, a Han Solo prequel, even more spin-offs, who knows? It's all too good to be true. But wait, hold up. This all feels a little too familiar. Haven't we been down this road before? The hype, the excitement, the catharsis after a long wait.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Oh no, what if this happens again? I mean, are we so blind? Have we forgotten already? Remember this? And this? And oh god, this? We've been hurt before. Can we really just go back like it never happened? Like victims of abuse, willing to get our hopes up, invest emotionally when we know how bad the disappointment will hurt? After we've been betrayed by the empty corporate merchandising destruction of our love, can we trust again? Can we love again? Sure, Star Wars has always been a merchandising machine, but this was a little too much. Can we really pretend like these movies will be any different? That these movies will make us care again? Can Star Wars really be important anymore? Does Star Wars even matter? Well, dear students, that's the topic of today's lesson, for I believe the importance of Star Wars cannot be so easily dismissed. That the past, present, and future of Star Wars is core to who we are. But to see why, we're gonna have to go back a little bit. To a long time ago in a galaxy far, well, actually, no, right here. This one. Our galaxy. 1977. Disco on the radio. Bell bottoms. People waiting around for cell phones to be invented. George Lucas, an ambitious young director known for his recent small-budget film American Graffiti, a heavily character-driven film about growing up in America, was about to release an out-of-this-world space fantasy, the first part of a crazy 9-part epic. A throwback to the sci-fi serials from the 40s and 50s, influenced by Flash Gordon, samurai films, and westerns, drawing from legends and myths across cultures. So on May 25th, Star Wars is released in theaters nationwide. Well, kind of. Star Wars was originally only released in 40 theaters around the country. You see, most people thought Star Wars was gonna bomb. Executives, marketers, Hollywood in general thought that this crazy sci-fi adventure was just too weird. People wouldn't get it, they'd be confused, they'd hate it. What's a Tusken Raider? Who's an R2-D2? When will Luke get his power converters? In fact, George Lucas even escaped to Hawaii during its release so he could be away from any negative reviews and publicity of its failure. But then... lines around the block. Showtime selling out non-stop, immediately expanding to theaters everywhere around the country, grossing $460 million domestically, $300 million overseas, breaking all kinds of records, the highest grossing film of all time, 10 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, something people hadn't seen before, a paradigm shift, the first modern blockbuster. But it wasn't just the money and the praise. Star Wars changed things. Sure, you had big films before, but not like this. This was a cultural phenomenon. There were reports on the evening news with Walter Cronkite describing its popularity. It bridged generational gaps, parents seeing it with children, teenagers, young adults. In fact, Star Wars was still playing in some theaters well over a year after its initial release. I bet your parents remember seeing it in theaters for the first time. Go ahead, ask them. I'll wait. See, I told you. And yeah, sure, it's easy to be jaded now, but can you blame them? Imagine going into a theater and seeing something like this for the first time. There wasn't anything like it. It was quickly heralded as one of the most important films of all time. Right up there with Citizen Kane, Godfather, A Trip to the Moon, Treasure Planet. Crazy little George Lucas. The guy all the big Hollywood players had dismissed, with his story people thought would never work, it paid off. And this is after so many problems during the production and how it seemed like the film was never going to get made at all. In fact, Universal, United Artists, and even Disney all passed on the film, and Fox only picked it up on a long shot, with a very strict budget restriction, a limit of $8 million. For a Hollywood film, even at the time, that was nothing. This video alone cost $25 million to produce. In fact, Lucas had to create a whole studio just to do the special effects. Fox had recently disbanded their special effects department, so he created Industrial Light and Magic. And hey, a few years later, when he started a special computer division within ILM, guess what they called it? Yeah, so in a way, you could say that Star Wars created Pixar, and in doing so, it helped make Disney what it is today. In fact, there's always been a strong connection between Lucasfilm and Disney throughout the years. From the partnership between Disney and Lucas with Star Tours, Captain EO, and 2 different Indiana Jones attractions, to the Star Wars themed weekends that have been running at Disney parks since 1997. And the impact of Star Wars goes beyond that. Star Wars came along to redefine the modern blockbuster, to establish the modern family movie formula that we are all accustomed to today, a formula that Disney molded into their own. The dominance of Disney as a household name in family entertainment is partially defined upon the rules that Star Wars established. So much of our modern culture is influenced by Star Wars. I mean, Star Wars essentially invented the model of the film trilogy, and now everything has to be a trilogy, even things that shouldn't be. And cliffhangers? Before Empire, that was pretty much unheard of. Can you think of a major film release before 1980 to end on a huge cliffhanger like Empire Strikes Back? Me neither. And neither can Google, trust me, I checked. We all get crazy when we have to wait a few months for the next season of Game of Thrones or Whitney. Imagine having to wait 3 years. The legacy is astounding. Star Wars is everywhere. All of these gambles, these small acts of necessity, these humble origins rooted in myth and culture, now film legend. George Lucas was a Hollywood god. Okay, you get it, Star Wars was important, its legacy lives on, blah blah blah, but that's history, Grandpa, what about now? Why should I care? Fair enough, what about now? Present day. I'll turn up pop music on the radio, hoverboards, and we finally invented cell phones. The Episode 7 hype train is in full gear, but things haven't really been so great for the Star Wars brand over the years. The franchise has been kinda dragged through the mud a little bit. The 1997 special edition releases of the original movie spruced up the visuals, sure, but it also made some edits that have been, let's just say, controversial. And its emphasis on special effects was an omen of the headache that we all know as the prequel trilogy. I won't go into too much detail here, there's plenty of videos on the internet that explain it, but let's just say that they didn't quite live up to the hype or the legacy. And the refusal to release the original trilogy unedited, the closure of LucasArts Entertainment, the seeming disregard for the passions of a fan community, fans began to start questioning the one true Messiah. Debates over who owns Star Wars. Does Lucas have the right to alter history and change our beloved films? Or do the fans own it now?
Sometimes you have to say the work is finished, it now belongs to the ages.
Should we get a say? Is it solely about merchandising? We start to fear what else he might do. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to internet message boards. And internet message boards lead to, oh god, they lead to awful places. And then the nail in the coffin. After the mess, after our inner nerds were crushed by the force of the CG Yoda dancing with lightsabers, Lucas says he has no plans on making any more movies, of finishing his original 9-part saga that he dreamed up so many years ago. All hope is lost. So when Disney buys Lucasfilm in 2012 and then shortly announces they're making more movies, it's like some kind of miracle. And this time without Lucas. Regardless of how you feel about George and his creative decisions, you have to admit that Star Wars and George Lucas were synonymous. And when they were no longer a package deal, it was a little strange. And it was made even more profound by the notion that it had come full circle. From Disney originally turning down Lucas's script, to Star Wars creating Pixar, and in a way kickstarting the Disney animation and family movie juggernaut, to now Disney buying the Star Wars franchise and possibly returning it to favor and saving it. After Star Wars influenced so much of Disney and so much of our own culture, now Disney is piloting Star Wars. And The Force Awakens is a rebirth. It's awakened something inside of all of us. Pre-sale tickets have exploded, exceeding previous records 10 times over. It's clear that the love for Star Wars is still there, that these characters and stories aren't dismissed so easily, that despite every reason to be unimpressed and hesitant, we are willing to believe again. But there's still that gnawing in the back of your head, right? That secret seed of doubt. What if it's bad? What if The Force Awakens sucks? What if it fails? And yes, you know, there's always that possibility, but dear students, what if I were to tell you that it doesn't really matter if The Force Awakens is good or not? That it doesn't make a difference if it sucks or if it bombs? What if I said it just doesn't matter? Okay, yes, Strictly speaking, if the movie sucks, it's gonna matter a little. People will get fired, money will be lost, it'll affect Disney's whole strategy moving forward. But I'm talking about something bigger, something far more important. What I'm talking about is the power of myth. You see, as a species, we are storytellers. Go back to the earliest sign of who we are. You have cave paintings, you have remnants of stories, ancient texts, hieroglyphs. All throughout history, we tell and create stories. Just think of the last conversation you had with a friend. You probably told a story. And these stories, they make us who we are, both individually and culturally. Our cultural identity is defined by the stories that we tell. Joseph Campbell, an American mythologist and expert in storytelling, maybe said it best. Myths are public dreams. All cultures have grown out of myths. These myths are cyclical. We find ourselves telling the same stories over and over again. Maybe we change some names and locations, but essentially the truth they convey remains the same. The light they shed on who we are is just as bright. And Star Wars is a part of that cycle now. George Lucas told a story 40 years ago, a story influenced by the stories and myths that came before it. The Hidden Fortress, Flash Gordon, Greek myths, Hinduism, I could go on. And in turn, the mythology of Star Wars inspired those that followed. People like J.J. Abrams and John Lasseter and myself. We listened and in turn began telling our own stories. Pixar, Disney, Mouseology are all part of Star Wars. Stories infused within the mythology of the Star Wars universe. Star Wars is no longer just a movie. It's more than that. It exists beyond the confines of a screen. Don't believe me? Did you know that Star Wars was selected to become part of the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as being culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant? I mean, Star Wars props and costumes are in the Smithsonian. You can visit their tour starting this year, actually. The freaking Smithsonian. Right next to anthropological artifacts and cursed mummies and tiny Owen Wilsons. You see, Star Wars is ingrained so deep in our cultural identity that it can't simply be made insignificant because of a bad movie. I mean, God knows not every Beatles song was perfect. Not every Shakespeare play is grand as the others. Take Dracula, for example. How many countless movies, TV shows, comics, serials have there been about Dracula and vampires? Too many. And some were awful. Some sucked. So awful that they drudged the very depth of human tolerance. But is Dracula gone? Did vampires lose significance because of a few bad films? Of course not. Star Wars is no longer a story that we watch. It's a story that we take part in. It's a living myth. It's who we are. Earlier I mentioned the question of who owns Star Wars. George Lucas or the fans? Now there can be no question. Lucas will always be the original creator. Every story has an origin, but in order for a story to become part of the living culture, it must transcend that individual ownership and enter our collective dream. Star Wars has achieved that. We own Star Wars. It belongs to everyone. It's our story now. The Force Awakens is being made by people who began as fans. J.J. Abrams grew up on Star Wars. It helped make him the filmmaker that he is, and now he's participating in it in turn, creating and adding to the universe, to the collective mythology. But so is everyone. Books, games, songs, costumes, celebrations, rides, you, me, this very video. We learn and participate in these myths, and in turn we add to their power. Every kid wielding an imaginary laser sword fighting evil in his backyard. Every lover who looks into their partner's eyes and says, I know. Every time someone points out a trap. It's a trap! Every time we look to find the good in people, to find the light, to fight for it, even in the face of darkness. We are living Star Wars. So does Star Wars matter? Yes, of course it does. And it will continue to matter as long as we keep telling stories. Because it's a part of us. Past, present, and future. Star Wars will be with us. Always. For tonight's homework, we'd like to know, what kind of a Star Wars themed ride or attraction would you like to see at a Star Wars theme park? Go crazy with this one, guys, because this video is actually a part 1 of a 2-part series about Star Wars. So make sure you subscribe to Yum Chunks and stay tuned for the next lesson of Mouseology, where we'll be exploring the Star Wars theme park that Disney plans to build at Disneyland and Disney World. And while you're at it, click on over to facebook.com/yumchunks to stay tuned for even more Mouseology news. Thanks for joining us this week on Mouseology, and until next time, may the Force be with you, and class dismissed.